Hello, and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Drs Schuster and Oxley, The Power of Stories, the podcast. As we have now reached the end of 2025, I think it's now a law. I think it's been declared a law that any podcast or indeed any program should have a retrospective, should look back on the year and ask themselves the question, what did we do well? What were the highlights? It's very much the season for reflection. New Year's resolutions, we start by looking back, having an honest conversation about the discussions that we have. There's also a period over Christmas where we seem to argue with people. I spend and have spent a very pleasant hour just arguing with my co-host here about different world and global events. And I will say I feel actually somewhat unburdened because I've been able to lay my concerns and anxieties on his shoulders. Perhaps he'll tell me that he doesn't or does feel the same way in a moment. So this is an episode that will be a retrospective on 2025. We started the Power of Stories podcast back in the early part of 2025. The idea was to promote storytelling in business and careers by asking people to come and share a story that has had meaning for them in their professional lives. 18 episodes or 17 episodes later, 19 or 20 hours of conversations. We've talked to people who have been business founders, leaders, academics, quiet thinkers, Generation Z, boomers, the whole spectrum of the generations. And we've had some amazing stories. We've had some stories from books that have been iconic, like The Little Prince. And we've had stories that have been much more personal about fathers promising cars for graduation perfect exams. And all of them have educated us, enlightened us. And in a way, those stories have been gifts that have inspired us to think somewhat differently about our own lives and our own professions. And at the end of it, I think this storytelling anchor has reinforced itself as something that has resonance. There's this great academic, Hermann Ebbinghaus, who came up with the learning curve and talked about how traditional learning, when you're in a classroom in a lecture and someone's just telling you information that you've got to somehow store away, the rote learning system of education that has been promoted for the last couple of hundred years, and you've got to somehow regurgitate that in an exam. We forget that stuff pretty quickly because we have no emotional attachment to it. The difference with stories is that we immerse ourselves in the emotion of it and it resonates with us at a different level. And I was reminded of a couple of big quotes as I was preparing for this podcast. Steve Jobs, who for me is one of the greatest storytellers of the last 50 years, certainly from a business standpoint, he actually said the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. And I think he lived that through the way that he promoted his products and talked about putting the customer first. And then if we go back a couple of thousand years or 3,000 years to Plato, Plato said that those who tell the stories rule society. So, I mean, this is something that has been with us from the earliest stages of human civilization. And yet I think we often forget it in the corporate world. We often start talking about memorizing formulas or job descriptions or mechanistic aspects of life. This episode celebrates the stories that we heard either from podcast guests or that we wrote or that we were associated with in 2025. And I'm here joined once again by my esteemed partner in crime, Helmut Schuster. Helmut, where should we start with this retrospective? What do you think is the right way to get through it?
David, let me start with one thing. I'm always impressed by how eloquent you basically introduce these podcasts. Yeah? I do realize, and I want the audience to realize, that you put a lot of work and research into that. Yeah? And like a year ago, when we started the podcast, it was basically your baby. You forced me into this baby, into this parenthood. And I have to admit, and I hate to admit, it actually started doing podcasts. Yeah. And I think part is to do that we had amazing guests last year, and we will continue that in 26. But I thought reflecting on 25 on the previous years was a good idea. And so I thought we should think about really 4 questions. What is the one podcast or the one situation that truly inspired you or left an impression or made you think? I think it would be nice to also have a bit of a conversation about, because a lot of our work is actually going into book writing, marketing our books, selling our books. Like, what is the thing you really did enjoy the most, and what is the thing that really gave you energy back. I think we should also discuss a bit or talk a bit about like writing highlights, because people know or do not know is that apart from writing books, we do a lot of writing for different publications, and it's normally a very tight timeline, sometimes like 2 days, 3 days, 24 hours. And it's actually really, really inspiring. At least I find it very inspiring. And the last thing I think we should also share, like with our audience, like a personal highlight. Yeah, what is our personal highlight, achievement, fun moment in 2025? So first question to you is, you had a bit of time to think about it now. So what is the moment, that really made you think or inspired you as part of our podcast storytelling series?
Yeah, I look back at all the podcasts and they all stand out for different reasons. I particularly like the Ali Al-Sabah conversation because I think it personified this pluralistic approach towards careers, the idea of doing 5 or 6 things at once. I also enjoyed the Tricia Connolly story, a longtime colleague of ours, but hearing the story about how her father had promised her a car for getting perfect grades and how that had sort of stayed with her was something that stood out. I think a couple of the episodes of the podcasts are very hard to pick between because they all represented different things. I really enjoyed the 2 episodes that we did that were sort of more one-on-one, talking about On Character with General McChrystal and the story of your coach, Hannah Laurie, and her taking you to one side and say, well, if you're going to do this well. So they all have meaning. It's very difficult to pick between them. If I talk about what inspired me most, I think actually it was a conversation I had at the book launch of Artificial Death of a Career when we were at the BP building. And there were a couple of the people who had attended who talked about reading our books, not just the last one, but A Groundhog Career, and how it had helped them. And I think there was something about the authenticity of that conversation and the sense that something had helped. I was inspired because they were Gen Z, that they have the careers ahead of them. And I distinctly remember a conversation with a couple of people in November who talked about embracing AI and how they had this 20 or 30 year roadmap ahead of them and how they were enthusiastic to get into it. It was inspiring because it felt to me like the very epitome of why we do this work, to try and help someone. I still have shivers thinking about the conversation a little bit. So for me, that was the most inspiring.
That's great. I mean, it's actually funny that you say that because like, as you were talking about, actually, that's so right. Because when you write a book or when you write an article or when you write a LinkedIn post, sometimes you don't fully realize that people are actually reading this. I mean, at least that's my writing, because I enjoy writing, because I enjoy structuring my thinking. But when then people say, well, I really liked the post, I really liked the article in this, liked what you and David do, it's always a bit of a surprise when people point out specific quotes from the book, specific parts. So I pretty much have the same reaction to that. As you don't really have I really don't have a preferred guest. But there's one thing in which really resonated is one person, and that's Sharon Turns. So his story, being a Singaporean, moving to London to live his life, finding it really hard to tell his parent, because he's the oldest son, that he is a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and then creating a company that caters to the well-being of this community. And there's one thing he said to me which really, really resonates. That, well, I came out to my father some time ago, and he was very accepting, and I was very lucky. But it was a completely different kind of thing to come out to the world by having like a gay LGBTQ plus business, And I found that so endearing when he said that. And I find him also very courageous by doing what he does, especially in the context of the world context. So I think I found that very, very inspiring, the courage, what he does, but also the success of his business. Whenever I talk to him, he basically says, I don't really have a lot of time because I have to work. So like, are you looking after yourself and your personal? Well, I have to work. And this is one common thing many of our guests have in common. Work. They don't talk about work-life balance. They always talk about work. is such a significant part of the life, which I find very, very interesting. Hey, how about like moving to the second question, really? And how much time do you actually spend on book writing, on like your work week, specifically on our writing, on our content creation? How much time do you actually spend on that?
Well, before we do that, can I just share something? Because you said the second question
sure.
was what we enjoyed the most. And I wanted to
Yeah, I was going to
give a shout out to Barry Thomas, because Barry Thomas is a guest that we had early on in the podcasts. Barry has been a supporter of ours in a couple of the book launches. I was also fortunate to be on Barry's podcast, and I have really enjoyed his company, his sense of humor, his stories. So if I had to pick something that I enjoyed that we wouldn't otherwise have been doing had it not been for this writing venture. And in a way, I think it just that Barry epitomized meeting some people that I perhaps wouldn't otherwise have met, spending some time with some people I wouldn't otherwise have met, because I could equally have included Felix Henderson, who we interviewed for the first book, or Alison Edgar, who has been just a force of nature. That there are these people that we have met solely because we've decided over the space of the last 3 or 4 years to try and lean into reinventing career advice for a population that has been underserved. That we've come across these personalities, these people, and they've literally just brightened up my life a little bit.
I would agree with that. One of the probably best aspects of writing these books is really meeting many people which we would normally not meet. And what really struck me is actually the readiness, the openness to really share their lives with us in a very unfiltered way. I found that really very, very encouraging, that people are very generous with their time to work with us. And I found that actually very, very amazing. I think by now we probably have a longer list of the pipeline of many people who want to be on our podcast, which I think is also great. Yeah. And so we need to be very careful that we don't miss out on anyone. But, what I also really, really enjoyed last year, and it started with the breakfast, it started with the book, it started with an idea. And what really I found amazing that last year we had 2 books coming out, which is quite an achievement by any means, but also like that we significantly improved our online appearance and presence. I think we realized over the last years, writing books is just one thing. Selling book is a completely different cup of tea. And I think we have really, really raised the game. And thanks to your lovely wife, Sue, who is now looking after our Insta account. And I think she does a tremendous job. And I also want to basically our website and everything comes together. And
our award-winning website.
Award-winning website. That's true. That's very true. Multi-award-winning website, actually, to be precise. Yeah. No, but actually the feedback I get on what we do on Instagram, you don't realize that people actually look at that. But I get so many people just basically saying, listen, this was a really good post. Listen, that was really nice. Love the black and white of your website. So I think we should acknowledge that as well. Yeah. Marketing is as important as writing good books.
And then so there's a lot to enjoy, isn't there? Because I think, to sum up that section of enjoyment, I think something we would both probably acknowledge is that when you get to do something and feel like you've done it well, and I think the website really fits into that category, which is that you can just have a website because you have to have a website. It's mechanistic, it's perfunctory, or you can do something that really makes you feel that you've created something good. And the website fits into the latter category. It's but a lot of what we did, I think, in 2025, if you go back to 2023, and perhaps I would add this as an enjoyment over and above meeting some of these extraordinary people, is a sense that we've achieved a level that I don't know that we necessarily would have anticipated in 20. I mean, we had that fatal croissant and raspberry breakfast in 2022, June of 2022. So if I think about what we were talking about in June of 2022, and I think about where we are now, I don't think I could have quite conceived that we would have come this far. So that gives me a sense of enjoyment, a sense of accomplishment that blurs the line with enjoyment. I don't know if you'd agree.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think it's also like the joy of getting better at something because I really believe our books are much better. Book two is better than one, three is better than two. Going back to one, I realize actually book one is actually also very good. So this is the nice thing. But I think we definitely got much better at understanding marketing. And I think for me, one of the inspiring things was I really start understanding the industry. So both of us have worked in the oil industry, in the energy industry. And so we really didn't know a lot about publishing. And I think our learning curve is still very steep, but I think we're much better than 2.5 years ago when we started this. And I think that is quite important. Yeah. And I realized like the much, and that's same with careers, the much you acquire expertise, the better you get, the more you enjoy things. And I think this is for me a big lesson. I think we've both experienced that. Do we
Writing
just want to
highlights?
talk? Yeah. Do we want to talk a bit? Because I just recently looked at all the things we did write in the past, not only the books, but for different publications. And it must have been more than 100 or something like that.
Yeah, over 100 total articles,
Yeah. And so I picked the
including
favorites.
hosting a guest edition of magazine and all of those
Yes. Oh,
articles.
yes. Right. That was actually great. HR Today. Yeah. So shall we talk a bit about our favorite writing
Yes, you go
publication
first.
topic? Well, and I hope you didn't want to talk about the same, but really, and I touched that by the things that really, really resonate with me, and we wrote about that, but which makes me think a lot about it and which entered my life in terms of conversation. That was the distinction between wrote an article, I'm sure you remember that, where we talked about burnout versus bore out. And this is a concept which I think is so important. And I think we wrote like more than one piece about that. Because I think it is so true. And I had I was in Colombia for a few weeks before Christmas, and I met many lovely people. But this concept, people would mostly agree that after 2 years in a job, they said, well, actually, you get a bit bored. The energy it takes to look busy with your bosses is quite discouraging and stressing people out. Yeah. So I think the research we did and the work we did on that is actually pretty good. And I think I still have not really come to a final conclusion, how to get underneath that. But I think companies really need to seriously think about that, how to basically think about that, this phenomenon. I think most companies really don't think about these things. They're so busy doing other things, and I think we really can help them with their thought process.
So giving you a plug for that article, Bore Out versus Burnout, Identifying Workplace Challenges and Building Resilience, which was in the Training magazine. Excellent article. It's difficult because, let me first of all say, every time I write something, I love it. I adore it. It is the best article I've ever written. So, and there is a difficulty of picking between all of your children, right? You create all of these things, and each one of them, I think we're both wired in this way, where someone gives you a subject matter, or we've volunteered to answer someone's question, and you something clicks and you go, oh, this is a very important perspective, and you are able to commit that to paper. And in a way, this sort of blurs into the writing highlights, that there is something quite revealing and cathartic and fulfilling about moving from a concept through this sort of strange alchemy that happens in your brain, between your brain and your fingers, when you actually get the article down and you then edit it, and then we bounce it between. We always bounce these things between us before we send them off. And you read it for the first time because the Helmut's written something, and I'm reading it and I'm going, oh, I absolutely agree with that. That's brilliant, right? But I wouldn't necessarily have thought that if someone had just asked me the question randomly in the street. It's only after having had the opportunity to reflect. And so this is, in a way, I think this writing process is a gift. It's the opportunity to be given subjects that are important to us. And what's important to us ultimately, helping people have better careers, particularly helping young leaders overcome some of the challenges that are there in the professional world, and to try and see if we can be virtual coaches in a way to help them overcome those barriers. But I think as we've done each of these articles, they've all had an appeal. One of my favorites, simply because it really ticked a bunch of the boxes, which is that I like to have fun with some of these articles. I like there to be some humor in it.
Yes.
I like to try and push the scenario to an extreme so as to point out that there's something about it that I think that we've overdone or underdone. And then it gives me the inspiration to write the article. So I wrote this article, or we wrote this article, I should say, which is that if the world is run by a all-powerful artificial intelligence in 2034, should I still be an accountant? And I've had a couple of people talk to me about the article, and I love the concept. I still think it's a lovely concept. Everyone worries about artificial intelligence. Everyone worries about how things are changing, and yet people today still go and qualify to be a CPA. It's an interesting paradox or a juxtaposition between this sort of very old one, or for that matter, an attorney. Pick any of the traditional backward-looking industries or professions. There is simultaneously a dialogue taking place in the media and with all of the books that are out, which is that the world is rapidly changing, that there's a suggestion that there's going to be some sort of all-powerful artificial intelligence. Well, if that's the case, surely some of these old professions probably aren't nearly as secure as they used to be. And I find the contrast between those two things quite interesting. So I loved writing that simply because I thought it was a very fun article to try and jolt people. So I think I enjoyed that, but that's among many, because I would say every single one of the things we did, including the two books, which were in their own way, were 2025 achievements.
Yeah, I think I found it really interesting because I did like the accounting article. Yeah, is accountant still needed the next 5 years? And early January is always like Las Vegas, who is hosting the Consumer Electronics Show. Big thing, very big thing, yeah. And there was a really nice article written and said, well, basically, and again, robots are here. They've been here for 20 years, and they still don't do anything meaningful in your home. And that has been the big sensation every year for the last 25 years. And David knows that. He is, I'm a bit more skeptical about AI and the speed of its adoption, yeah. Whereas David is a bit more positive on the speed. I believe it's going to take much longer than people think to really help us in a very useful way and to really create the productivity gains. But once it comes, it will become big time. And I think it's going to be like with the robots. At one point in time, robots actually will change our lives, will be very different. But I think all these changes are going to take a bit longer than we think it will.
This would be a good point to plug the next episode, because as much as this is a reflective episode on 2025, stay tuned, because next week there'll be an episode on our predictions for 2026. So that's a great segue. Thank you. Your final question was a personal highlight, I think. So
yeah, it's just personal highlights, yeah.
Do you want to go with your personal highlight first?
Yeah, basically, I think for me, it was really just, it was very much to do with the amount of writing we accomplished and not compromising on quality. So my highlight is actually do many things, but not compromise on quality. Because when you do many things, I mean, the risk is always you just do it quickly or you compromise. And I think my highlight was not a specific, but I think in 2025, all the things I tried to do, I did without compromising on quality standards. And I'm very proud of that. And also applies to family and spending quality time with my niece and nephew and my family and my sister. So not compromising quality is probably highlight of my year. How about you, David?
It reminds me a little bit your thought there. One of the things that our social media consultant was showing me was a post that's going out this week. Talks about this duality, the paradox between excellence versus priority or focus. The quotes about excellence is a habit, and the companies that constantly put in their values that they're, the pursuit of excellence. And I've always felt that it sits awkwardly with the equally important task to focus, to prioritize. And what's the adage? There's this adage that I'm quite fond of, that if you chase two chickens, you'll catch neither. I think that's quite funny, but it's also very true. So I think what we did, to your point, is that we pursued excellence in the right places. There are 3 or 4 things that I think we really focused in on in 2025, trying to get 2 high quality books out that built on the previous books. Each was better than the one that went before. One of my New Year's resolutions for 2025 was that we would do the 2 books, but each would be better than the previous one, that they would sort of build. And I feel like we fulfilled that. And I think that's nice. It feels good. If I look back over 2025, so as to try and come up with something different, but also to mention a couple of things, I think your AFS presentations and the fact that there was the Groundhog Career was present during that was a personal highlight. Appearing on the BBC, was a pretty personal highlight. I didn't think I'd ever do that. The award that we got from the Goody Business Award, that not just 1 award, but 3 awards for a Groundhog Career, which in a way, I think, sometimes I feel a bit embarrassed about these awards because, you don't necessarily want to blow your own trumpet. But I think if what it is an indication that we are making progress, that book 2 got more recognition than book 1 and book 3 is in the process of surpassing the other 2, then I think it's a useful measure. Are they each achieving a different level of readership, a different level of acknowledgement? So I think they were all good. The main thing I think as a personal highlight for me is just simply, I think, going back to your point and putting it in my own terms, I think I'm a better writer at the end of 2025 than I was at the end of 2024. I just think that this idea of practicing, of refining, of getting clearer and clearer about how we write, what the voice is, what the tone is, and then just sharpening our skills. I think the articles that we've written have all been very good, but I think that we have progressed in the style and the way of producing those. So yeah, I think that for me is probably the personal highlight.
I could not agree more. And it brings me back to the first breakfast, when I think we looked at each other and we both said, are we crazy? Yeah? Are we crazy to write books after such a long corporate career? And I think we, at least for me, I think enjoyed as much or even more than a corporate career. How about you?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think you always worry whether you can do it. One of the things we discussed in going back at the outset was that if we're going to write books, let's write books. There are a lot of people out there that have their names on books, but how much of those books they wrote themselves is always a little bit of a question. So what we have done, for better or worse, and I'm not saying that everything we've done is perfect, as much as we've tried to make it as perfect as we can, but we've tried to do it all ourselves, from writing the books, from editing the books, from working with artists to design the illustrations. If you told me in June of 2022 that we would have produced 3 books and 100 plus articles and won countless awards, I would not have believed that.
Okay.
So on that note, let me just close this particular episode. As I say, stay tuned, because the next episode is going to be our prognostications, our predictions, which I think, as the patent clerk in 1899 famously said, everything that has been invented has now been invented. And obviously, he was proven wrong. So there are all sorts of fraught difficulties in making predictions. But it seems to me that the natural partner to this episode is an episode that talks about the future, what we think is going to come in the coming year. So stay tuned for that. If you've enjoyed this episode of Drs. Schuster and Oxley, The Power of Stories, then first of all, check out the other episodes if you haven't already. One of our episodes had over 1,000 people viewing it. I thought that was quite remarkable for something that only started a few months ago. So if you haven't checked out some of those previous episodes, do so. If you like the episode, as Helmut loves to say, and I'll just say it on his behalf, if you loved this podcast, you will love the books. There are 3 of them. Let me provide you with a link. And if you're not signed up to our LinkedIn or Instagram, you should do so. And finally, a big plug for one of the favorite things that neither one of us mentioned during this podcast, but arguably was a personal favorite pastime of me throughout the year, was writing our newsletter. We write a newsletter each month. It's written by Helmut and I with a great deal of love and affection. You can sign up for it via our webcast. Probably of everything we write, it's the most intimate piece of the writing that I feel I do. It's It's kind of like a letter to friends about what we're trying to do. How do you feel about the newsletter, Helmut?
Actually, it's good that you mentioned. It's interesting that we didn't mention it throughout the last 30 minutes, because the newsletter is really, really a prime product. And I really do believe, firstly, it's a lot of fun, but secondly, I receive many newsletters from different companies, organizations. Truthfully, I think our newsletter is probably in the top 5%. In terms of quality. That's exactly the feedback I get. When people have signed up, they really look forward to the newsletter. So yes, it's a highlight of last year as well.
Okay, so we'll give you a link to all of those things. But with that, let me end this particular podcast with the traditional, it's goodbye from me and...
Und Servus von mir.